We have been very fortunate to have some special guests. Last night at the reception, we had the mayor's staff. We had Sheriff Stephen Tompkins, who talked to us about the criminal justice work he's doing. So I want to introduce, again, for those of you who weren't at the reception, the young woman to my right. Lori Nelson is a child born and raised in the NAACP. Her mother was an NAACPer here in Boston in the 1960s, a very prominent civil rights activist. Her mother was involved with the state conference of the NAACP, and on the national level, if you ask any of the old guard NAACPers, they know Miss Nelson, Charlotte Nelson. And she raised Lori in the NAACP. Lori, when I first joined the NAACP in Boston, kept badgering me to get involved. She kept saying, Michael, you gotta get involved, you need to step up, stop BSing, that's what she would say. And you need to step up and do stuff. And she literally badgered me for like a year before I really got deeply involved. She became, I'm telling the truth. She became my second vice president when I was president of NAACP, and then she became the first vice president under Tanisha Sullivan that you met last night. It is a testament to the work of the NAACP and our relationships that now she has moved on and she's the Chief Resilience Officer for the City of Boston, a huge role created under this mayor who she will introduce. I will say a little remark about him after he speaks, but I wanted Lori, fittingly enough, to introduce her boss.
Be nice.
I saw, yes. Oh, okay. So good morning, everyone. Good morning. How are you all? The young lady who just did the presentation, where is she? Hi. Oh, that was wonderful. Thank you so very much. Thank you. Very quickly, because I know your time is short, and since I've been called one to badger, I do not want the look from Michael Curry. I'm just joking. But I have this wonderful privilege. The young man to my left, who was also the CEO of this city, Mayor Martin J. Walsh, has made up in his mind that he wants to be one of our champions to push the needle forward in this historic city of Boston around race and race relations. He tapped me into this wonderful framework around 5 months ago, and his heart and his passion for change and commitment for everyone to have access and opportunity is why I was happy to join and become a part of the team. And so I would really ask you all to give a warm welcome to our CEO and Mayor Martin J. Walsh for the City of Boston.
Thank you, Laurie. No, don't get up. If I do a good job, you can stand up after. Let me just first of all correct Michael Curry. Michael Curry, I think, if I heard it correctly, said Laurie's going to introduce her boss. If you don't know Laurie Nelson, I am not her boss. She is my boss, and I appreciate it. I want to start with Michael, thank Michael Curry. I've known Michael for a long time. I knew him before his role as the president of the NAACP here in Boston, in his job, his daytime job. He's done amazing stuff in the city. He's done amazing stuff in healthcare. He's done amazing stuff as the president. He's done an amazing job on the national level at the NAACP, and I want to thank Michael for his incredible work. I want to thank the Boston chapter as well. I want to thank all of you for being here today. I have a speech prepared. I have no idea if I'm going to go on the speech because as I was walking in, we're talking about what's going on in Washington today with the Supreme Court nomination, and I think all of us are just kind of, every day we're scratching our head on everything that happens. You know, last night I'm watching CNN and I'm watching, you know, the verdict come down in the shooting. I'm watching Kavanaugh being approved. I'm watching Democrats in certain states voting with the Republicans all the time. I don't even know why they're Democrats if they're going to vote Republican all the time. I'm watching all the uncertainty going on in our country. I'm watching all this stuff, and young people are trying to figure it out, and I'm trying to figure it out. I like to say I'm a young person, but I'm trying to figure it out. I grew up in a house that my parents are from Ireland. They were immigrants. Never talked bad about anybody. My father was a laborer. He got dirty every day, went to work every day. My mother was a homemaker. She was able to stop working while we were in school. Back then, we didn't make a lot of money, but that's what you did. And when I went to high school and my brother was in 7th or 8th grade, 6th or 7th grade. My mother went back to work, and she went back to a place in Boston. I won't name it, but she went in there, and it was kind of like a special club, an elite club, and they had like a hotel. And she talked about the way that people treated her when she went in to clean the rooms. And I don't say that. I'm not a politician up here talking about, you feel bad about me. I'm just saying the reality. So I grew up in that house. And I grew up in a neighborhood in Dorchester, which is a diverse neighborhood. When I was a kid growing up, most of the people around my street were Irish and Polish and Italian, but 2 streets away were Cape Verdean, African American, Latino, and it was our neighborhood. And the reason why I say that, because as time went on, the neighborhood changed, and my mother's still there, and I don't live too far away, and it wasn't a segregated area, but it was an area that really everyone kind of came together. I ran for office. I got sober when I was 28 years old. I'm not going to go into that story, but alcoholism is part of my story. I put myself in bad situations. I've been arrested. I've been shot at, all the stuff that, not all the stuff that alcohol brings, but I put myself, every time I got in trouble, I was drunk, and that was alcoholism. And I got sober, and I ran for office. And the very first issue that confronted me when I ran for office, I was about 3 months in office, was the fact that I had to vote in the death penalty. And at the time in 1997 in Boston, the governor was for it, and everyone was for it because we just had a horrible murder. And for me, it was the first time I had to take a real grown-up issue and really make a decision. I made decisions before that, but this was a real one facing me. It was a life and death situation. And I listened to everybody, and I ended up voting against the death penalty. And in the legislature, the vote was 80 to 80. It was a tie. And that tie caused the bill to die. It would have been law in Massachusetts, but it died. And then from that point on, it went further down. A few years later, marriage equality came up on the ballot. And I decided, for me personally, it was the right thing to do because the gay community needed champions. And I was asked, one of my colleagues who was gay said, can you do me a favor? You're a white Irish Catholic guy. Can you stand up and support marriage equality? Because you can convince people into making sure to do the right thing to preserve benefits for people. And in 2004, I voted that way. And we were able to preserve marriage equality in Massachusetts for gay couples. As we continue to move forward, life in Boston and life I didn't deal with the Boston stuff as far as racism. I did as a state representative, and what I used to say was my district was 67% people of color and all broken up, and it was true what I said. But it wasn't until I started to run for mayor that I was confronted with a question. I was at a town hall. We had these things called Mondays with Marty, and I was running for mayor as a candidate. And I would bring people in, and we would have conversations, and we'd set up like this, and somebody would ask questions, and I'd give answers. And so a woman stands up. I'm in Jamaica playing one night, and a woman stands up in the back of the room, and she says to me, "Can you explain the state of racism in Boston?" And for me, as a candidate for mayor, it's a tough question, because how do you answer that question? And I'm thinking, there's an audience full of people here, and I got to answer this question that the majority of the audience likes what I say, and how do I answer it? So I said, racism exists in Boston, but it's better than it was. And she pushed on me, and she pushed back on me. And I said, well, my district's 67% people of color. I started a program in the building trades called Building Pathways for People of Color to get in the building trade. I did all that. And she pushed back on me again. And she continued to push back on me, so we finished the night, went on to other questions, and I left there, and I was pissed. I wasn't mad at her. I was mad because I didn't understand, and I didn't have an answer. And I went back, and we sat down at our policy table, and I said, we got to deal with the issue of racism and race. We got to talk about how do we confront it. And what was said at the table is you have to say things that aren't going to be popular. You have to say things that are going to piss people off. And you have to confront it head on. And we started to talk about what we were going to do in our office if I got elected mayor of Boston and how I'd address it, and I'll talk about that in a second. And it really was a turning point for me in the campaign for mayor personally inside of my heart, because I looked at the issue of racism in a whole different light. I looked at white privilege in a whole different light. I looked at systemic racism in a whole different lens. It was in front of me, but I didn't see it. Or I saw it, but I didn't truly see it. So we got to work. I got elected. And what we're able to do is, I said that we're going to have race dialogues in the city. At the same time, Michael got elected. And Michael's the new president of the NAACP Boston. I'm a new mayor, and I know Michael in our old world. And I'm thinking this is going to be great, because I know Michael from the old world, and the old world was easy. We advocated for the same thing. It wasn't so easy. Michael pushed me, I pushed Michael. But what it was a learning for me. So we created the Office of Resiliency. What does that office mean? That office means having race dialogues in the city of Boston is what it means. It means going out and having difficult conversations. It means going out and talking to people about white people, about what it means to be, and what the emotions are, and what the experience are of black people. And having those dialogues across the city. Laurie's our second director there. The first one was Dr. Atia Martin, who set the office up. And then Laurie's the second person now taking these conversations out to the neighborhood and having dialogues. And Laurie can talk about that more later. It's also about how do we make sure that the city and the leadership of the city and the workers in the city reflect the community. And the first thing we did was, I know I'm jumping all over the place, and shut me off if I have to, we made sure that the command staff of the police department were 50% people of color. And we did that. And what we did was, it's not a clap. It's not a clap. But the important pieces were, we put Lisa Holmes in charge of our academy,
She'll be here later.
training our police officers. And she changed the way we train our police officers in Boston. She talked about racism. She talked about understanding. She talked about conflict resolution. She talked about how do you deal with homelessness? How do you deal with addiction? How do you deal with all those people? And Lisa's going to speak for herself. She's amazing. She retired since. But Lisa laid the foundation down at the police department. How do we change that? It was how we have a different engagement in our community, because Boston, as everyone knows, is a racist city. How do we change that engagement? So we thought about it at the police department first. And then we started to look at different parts. As you know, the first chapter of the NAACP started at Park Street in 1911 here. We started to look all across our city, making sure that we have opportunities. And we said we need a diversity office in Boston. Not a diversity office, no, this is not a diversity officer here, and every time I go to a meeting, this is a diversity officer. Actually, somebody who has say and who can actually make a difference. And Donnie Tavares is here. I don't know if he's speaking today, but Donnie Tavares is here today. And 50% of the people that we've hired since I've been mayor are people of color. We also look at disparities along pay, making sure that, sure, you hire 50% people of color, but how many people are actually making $100,000 or $75,000? You hired everyone in public works. We are very cognizant, and his office is very cognizant to make sure that we have leadership, people of color throughout the organization. And not only that, we take it a step further. If you go online and you look at it's online, we break it down by African American, by Latino, by Cape Verdean, by Haitian. It's not simply a number. It's how do you do that? We started to look at areas that were important for us. Economic development. We created an Office of Economic Development because in the campaign for mayor, people were saying black people don't have the opportunity, Latino people don't have the opportunity to have benefits in Boston. And we put a person of color in charge of that office. We created it. And we're working now, 5 years in, really diving into making sure there's opportunities. Our education, we created the Chief of Education role in the city of Boston. Ron Dorsey leads that. I don't know if Ron's coming today, but Ron Dorsey leads that effort for me in the city. We have also the superintendent of schools. Our civic engagement is led by Jerome Smith, a person of color who's been working and has the experience through different areas. Health and Human Services, Workforce Development, our Office of Resiliency, so many, our Office of Housing, elections, I could go on and on, but it's not, these aren't just appointments being made. Fast forward 5 years later, we named the first chief of the police department, African American chief, 5 years ago. The commissioner is the #1 spot, the chief is the #2 spot. When Commissioner Evans left this year, we had to replace Commissioner Evans with somebody to take his job. The person that took his job was the chief, Chief Gross. He's African American. He didn't get appointed commissioner because he's African American. He got appointed commissioner because he started as a cadet. He worked his way through the ranks of the police department. He went on to become the night commander. He went on to become the chief of the department, and now he's the commissioner. And I would argue to you, not argue, I will say to you, in the next couple of years, he will be the leading commissioner in the United States of America because he understands it. And it's about how do we make those changes in our city. In 2010, I know one of your speakers coming up in a few minutes is going to be speaking. In 2010, the Boston City Council, City of Boston, elected the first woman of color to be a Boston City Councilor. That first woman of color went on a few weeks ago to be elected a congresswoman in the City of Boston. Today in Boston, we have, 8 years later, we have 6 women of color on the council, where we had 0. And one of the seats in our city, the first time in the history of our city, is being held by a person of color. And I'd probably say, more importantly, a woman of color, Ayanna Pressley, and she's here today. The conversation and the change is happening, is happening. We are in a time, I think we're in a time in this country of fear, uncertainty, anger, discrimination, sexism, all of the different things that whatever word that we can think about. And I try to make sense of what's happening in this time in our world, in our country. And it's really difficult. But all I can think about is that we're building a bridge. We're building a bridge. And we have to continue to build that bridge. And that bridge is to a better place. And that bridge is that we look back, because we can't forget our past, and we should never forget the past. And as we're going over that bridge, we have to look back and say, these are all the issues and problems that we've had to deal with, whether it was in 1910, 1920, 1960, 1974 in Boston with busing, whatever it was, with all of the shootings and all of the issues and all of the sadness and all of the things and all of the fear and all of the anger going on. And there's a real opportunity. There's a real opportunity now. And I say that because I'm looking out at the change. I'm looking out at the change. I've been doing this work for a while. I'm going to continue to do it for as long as the people of Boston let me. And when I'm done with this, I'm probably going to try and do something else to change the world. The people up here have been doing this work for a while. A lot of the speakers that came, Steve Tompkins has been doing this work for a while. Other people have been doing this work for a while. There are young leaders in this room. You don't have to run for office to be a leader. You don't have to get on CNN or BET or maybe even Fox News, because if you're on Fox News, you made it, because they hate us all, to be a leader. But what you need to do is you individually need to be a leader of change, whatever that means. That definition is broad. That definition is broad. As a state rep, I was one of 160 and one of 200. And I felt that I had made a difference in people's lives, even though I was only one of 160 in the legislature. But I felt like I actually made a difference, a small piece every day. When I ran the building trades and I looked around the room, my second meeting with the building trades, all the leaders of the trades in Boston, they look like me. Some of them are older than me. And I said, guys, and they're all guys, I said, this isn't gonna work. This isn't gonna work. We need to do more. And we forced, through President Obama, who did a stimulus package to Boston, we forced a project, a job training program, and we guaranteed people going to the trades, people of color. That was in 2011. Since that time, over 300 people of color have got into the building trades through building pathways. When I became the mayor, I saw violence happening in our city, young kids shooting each other in no, when I say young kids, they're not young. Some of them are 35-year-old men. They're not that young. But I realized we have to do something to help people. And we went out and we targeted, we called a program called Operation Exit, where we took young people from the streets that were active in the streets, and we identified them, we put them into the building trades, and about 100 right now are working in the building trades. That's 400 people since 2011. That's not enough, but it's a start. If all of us in this room go on and do something special, one thing, that special thing might just be hug somebody. That special thing might be just talking to a legislator. That special thing might be writing an op-ed. That special thing might be tweeting something out. That special thing might be standing up for somebody who's getting picked on. That special thing could be anything. That special thing is showing up here in Boston today and talking about your towns in Mississippi and talking about your towns in other parts of the country. That's what our role is. Not one person. There's not one person. When President Obama got elected, there was a lot of hope. I was in Denver for the Democratic National Convention, and when he gave his speech, I had tears in my eyes because I thought back to my mother when she was in this country, when John F. Kennedy won the nomination. She was a 17-year-old girl from Ireland who was so excited that the first Irish Catholic person ever could become president of the United States of America, because that wasn't possible. That wasn't possible in 1959. And when President Obama gave that speech when he was the senator, I called my aunt in Ireland. I said, this is amazing. This must be how it was when John F. Kennedy, for the Irish people, when he got elected president. One person can't make the change. President Obama led the way, but he couldn't do it on his own, and he can't do it on his own. We need to continue to move forward. We need to continue to push forward. We need to continue to fight forward. We need to continue because we're building a bridge. We're building a bridge, regardless of what happens in Washington, D.C. As pissed off as I get, as pissed off as you get, as pissed off as we get on the stuff that comes out of Washington, whether it's a Muslim ban, or whether it's an immigration ban, or whether it's Kavanaugh and the other guy, whoever goes on the court, we need to continue to move forward. Because people came before us that laid down the foundation for all of us. They laid down the foundation for all of us to move forward. And we can't, they had the real fight. They had the real struggle. And it's our obligation and our job, regardless of the color of our skin, to continue to move forward, to push our community and our society for an equal society, not a more equal society, an equal society. So I am honored to be here today. I am honored to be with you here today. And I will say this last thing. I am not perfect. We are not perfect in the city of Boston. We have a long way to go. We have a lot of work to do. And we do that work together. And we do that work sometimes by Michael Curry calling me out. We do that work sometimes by Laurie Nelson coming to my office and saying, what's going on? But we have to acknowledge, if we can acknowledge the fact that we're not perfect, and if we can acknowledge the fact that we have shortfalls, and if we can acknowledge that fact, we can acknowledge the fact that we can continue to do great work together and move our country forward to an equal country. Thank you very much.
So do me a favor, another round of applause for the mayor of Boston. I'd be remiss if I didn't say this just quickly before he left. So the work of the NAACP, this is a training. So part of a training is you're supposed to walk away from this meeting this weekend learning something about the work. What I will tell you, Mayor, before you leave, raise your hands if there's a person you can name you agree with 100%. Me. 90%. 80%. 50%. Right? So what I look at in his work is the mayor of Boston, and this is true from the day he was elected to office. One thing that we're lucky for in Boston is that he's a good person. I don't think there's a person, and you can hear it in his remarks and in his speech, he's a genuinely nice guy. When I was a government relations leader here in Boston, and I would go to meetings and it'd be all white men, Boston Chamber of Commerce, name the event, and it would be 3 black people in the room out of 400 people. He would always make his way over to me, and you know, you're a black person, you're younger, because I was younger then, and they're thinking, well, he's not important, I don't need to know him. This guy who was a state rep would make his way over to say hi to me. Every single meeting. That matters, because you build a relationship way before they become mayor, before they become governor, and those relationships matter. The last thing I'll say is President Obama loved him. When Obama would launch an initiative, whether it was protecting immigrant rights or whether it was the blue body camera program that he launched, one of the first mayors he called and would bring down to DC is Mayor Walsh. because he knew Mayor Walsh would adopt whatever the policy was and roll it out here on a national level. Our youth program, and I've mentioned to all of you, we hired 30 kids every summer to work for the NAACP, paid. They got paid for 6 to 8 weeks to do what you do. You're doing it as volunteers. They would do voter registration, they'd walk the streets, talk about violence. He paid for it, right? So when you go to your mayors, go with an ask. Say that you want to be a part of the solution. Last but not least on that comment, we don't always agree. In fact, there's sometimes, he called me one time and yelled at me on the phone. I was like, is the mayor yelling at me on my cell phone? And there was tension oftentimes, but that's this work. I use that example, knowing you agree with 100%, you should be challenging your elected officials, and in fact, they should be challenging you. Because I'd get those calls saying, what is the NAACP doing about this issue, Michael? And then I'd have to respond. Have that kind of relationship with your elected officials. You won't always agree, but have a relationship outside of the work. Where you say, you know what, I know I got at you on the issue of minimum wage, or I got at you on the issue of no diversity in your police department, but let's go grab coffee. Let's just sit around and talk about our kids, our families, and then have a relationship, so then there's some balance in the relationship, so it's not always fighting. Because you fight with your mamas and your daddies, right? Don't think that you're not going to fight in civil rights work. So I want to say thank you again to the mayor for coming and his leadership team for being here.
Because it is my fundamental belief that the people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. For every issue that I have championed, every social issue that I have organized around, every solve that I've attempted to offer for the wounds in our community, I know that the best way to understand a problem is to be in community with those impacted by it. But not only does that strengthen your resolve about the need to address it, not only does it give you insight into how we arrived here in the first place, it is where the solutions live. The people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power, driving and informing the policy making. Now I'm going to give you 6 or 7 points here. I know you all are eating, but I see some of you have pads of paper and your phones. So I'm going to give you 6 or 7 points here. If you can't take it down, get your sister or brother too, and you can get it from them later. Because I was asked to bring you a message around transformative leadership. And I mentioned earlier that we are not in the midst of a blue wave or a black wave because of magic. We are in the midst of a paradigm shift that was ushered in because candidates and leaders made choices. Choice number 1, know who you are. Know who you are and embrace it. Choice number 2, stand in your truth unapologetically. Now, I feel like this generation is getting a lot of messaging about engineering a brand. I would caution you from engineering a brand. And if you simply learn to stand authentically and unapologetically in your truth, that will become your brand. So you needn't contrive something. These are uncertain times, and so what people are looking for are leaders with certainty about who they are, what they believe in, what they will fight and work for. So number 1, know who you are and embrace it. Number 2, don't engineer a brand, simply stand in your truth authentically and unapologetically. Number 3, choose to be an empathetic leader. See, the decisions and policies that are being made and rolled out in Washington every day that we are feeling the residual impact of, the reverberations of, is not about a lack of resourcing, a lack of prioritization only. That under-resourcing, that lack of prioritization comes from a deficit of empathy. Leaders and policymakers who have an inability to see the humanity in their fellow brethren. Our greatest deficit is not enough resources. Our greatest deficit is one of empathy. So number one, know who you are and embrace it. Number two, do not engineer a brand. Stand in your truth authentically and unapologetically, and that will become your brand. Choose to be an empathetic leader because we are operating from a deficit of empathy. Number four, recognize that power is not something to be monopolized, it is something to be shared. So be intentional about coalition and movement building. Choose to be a visionary leader. I think politicians are people who manage where we are, and visionary leaders take you someplace. So choose to be a visionary leader. Choose to be a leader who demonstrates a strength of conviction. Now, I'm not one to calculate my values for the purposes of political pandering. There's nothing wrong with tactical advancement, but I'm not building an electorate or my constituency by being a malleable shape shifter. I am building a constituency and a movement that is an extension of something much deeper than a platform. It is an extension and a vigilant commitment to manifest the strength of my conviction. So number one, know who you are. Number two, stand in your truth. Number three, choose to be an empathetic leader. Number four, recognize that the building of power, of what you must be intentional in your movement and coalition building, that power is not meant to be monopolized, it is meant to be shared. Number five, choose to be a visionary leader, not a leader who just manages where we are, but has a vision to take you someplace. Number six, choose to be a leader that demonstrates the strength of your conviction. Number seven, choose to be a leader that is disruptive and innovative. Disruptive and innovative. Now, for someone such as myself, the fact that I just chose to run was disruptive enough. What do you do when your very existence is the resistance? There are those who have contempt simply because I exist. So it was disruptive for many that someone who had toiled faithfully in the vineyard working for social, economic, and racial justice, someone who had worked 4 years for a United States congressman, 11 years for a United States senator, 8 years as a municipal elected official, 3 years as the top vote getter. It was disruptive that this black woman, who was unapologetically so, who wears her hair in Senegalese twists, who was honest and transparent about being a survivor of a near decade of childhood sexual abuse and later campus rape. It was disruptive that that same woman spoke of the challenges of being raised in a household with a father who battled addiction, who was in and out of the criminal justice system for 14 years. And then that same woman chose to marry a beautiful black diamond of a man who has his own past and who lost 10 years of his life due to a mandatory minimum. And that same woman who never earned a college degree, there are 21 members in the totality of the U.S. House of Representatives and the United States Senate that do not have a 4-year degree. Wow. And I make 22. So choose to be disruptive. I chose to be disruptive and not to wait my turn in a district that is 57% people of color, 30% foreign-born residents, and almost 40% single female-headed household. They thought it was audacious that I raised my hand to lead and thought I had something to contribute. The audacious and daft thing is not that I ran, it would have been if I didn't. So choose to be disruptive. I ran because I wanted to disrupt the systemic inequalities and disparities in the Massachusetts 7th. Disparities and inequalities that existed long before Donald Trump descended an escalator at Trump Tower. See, people are all caught up in the messaging of resisting Trump, of which we must, because he is a formidable foe that we must resist and affront at every turn. But the systemic inequalities and disparities in the Massachusetts 7th, where on a single bus ride from Cambridge to Roxbury, life expectancy drops by 30 years, and median household income by $50,000, existed long before that man occupied the White House. And the real rib is these conditions are man-made. They didn't just happen in the ether. It was my contention that if these conditions were created by policy and we were living in the residual aftermath of Reaganomics, of redlining, of unequal access to the GI Bill, of the war on drugs, of welfare reform, that if these conditions were created by man, then these policies can and should be disrupted by this woman. Right. So choose to be disruptive. And never, ever, ever stop working for hope. See, they tried to talk about how my lifting up hope all the time was Pollyannish and naive, but I know something. The people closest to the pain should be the closest to the power. When you live in the shadows and in marginalization, you know just how important hope is. So I don't care if Democrats are in the majority or in the minority, but I refuse to put hope and vision and aspiration on a shelf. I will work every day to see it in human form, to see it in policy making, to see it in community. So I'm going to end there. I hope we still have some time for some questions. But the last thing that I would offer, that was a very politician thing. I said, I'm done, and then I said the last thing. That's what we do. The last thing that I would offer about transformative leadership is that you often don't know you are in it until you are in front of it, right? So the polls, I just want y'all to understand what just happened here. So the polls had me down by 13 points. I was outspent 4-1. I rejected corporate PAC money. We raised $1 million in grassroots donations, but I was still outspent 4-1. I did not have the Democratic establishment locally or nationally. And we built this movement, one conversation, one person at a time, from the bodega to the church basement, to the T-stop, to the bus station, to the jailhouse, to your doorstep, to your kitchen, to your living room, extending a hand of partnership. And people felt seen and they felt heard. But every barrier was in our way, and every odd was against us, because here in a dark blue Commonwealth of Massachusetts, in a dark blue district like the Massachusetts 7th, we don't have primaries. Because we have said for a long time that a reliable vote is good enough. This is a progressive commonwealth, a progressive district. But I said, oh no. In the last 20 years, this district has changed, the needs have changed, and given what is happening in Washington, the job description has changed. What these times require is bold activist leadership. Someone that will movement and coalition build, someone that will be a visionary, someone that will be bold, not shrink, not play small. This was the seat held by John F. Kennedy. That means we can be unrestrained, unencumbered, bold, and innovative. This seat will never be represented by a Republican. So a reliable vote isn't good enough. And I can't pretend that because we're in a dark blue commonwealth, in a dark blue district, that because people are voting the right way, that everything is A-okay in the Massachusetts 7th. When we are living in systemic inequalities and disparities across every outcome. We were down 13 points. Dismissed, marginalized, discredited, and counted out. They kept lobbying charges against me of identity politics. Now, I am black and a woman, and pretty cute too. But I am black and a woman, that is obvious and unapologetically both of those. But that is not the totality of my identity. I am a wife. I am a mother. I was a caregiver to my mother, end of life. I'm an activist leader. I'm a policymaker, and I am a survivor. And these are all conflated parts of my identity. But they attempted to marginalize and to discredit what my contribution would be, which, by the way, is the only thing they do. They only do that to candidates and women of color. That's it, to women and to candidates of color. And it's a very predictable play from the GOP handbook, not something that I expected to be lobbied against me by fellow Democrats, and certainly not people that consider themselves to be progressive. But we are often more rhetorically liberal than truly liberal and committed to leadership parity. Now, I want to make this about leadership parity because cognitive diversity matters around decision-making tables and in the corridors of power. What am I talking about when I say cognitive diversity? A diversity of perspective, of opinion, of thought, which means that when you have that, new and different issues are raised. It means the solutions are more innovative and more enduring. So I never asked anybody to vote for me because I was black and a woman. But I will not pretend that representation doesn't matter, because it does. But I say all that to say that the analysts counted us out, the pundits counted us out, the experts counted us out, the pollsters counted us out. But I believed in the power of us and the power of people. And so even though the polls had us 13 points down, what I know is that you cannot poll transformation. And it is coming. And I thank all of you for being a part of it. Thank you.